The events in the story occurred on a warm and humid night in late August of 2008, the night after Tropical Storm Faye ripped through our town of Gaston County, Florida. Looking back on this, I will say that the terror of that storm was nothing compared to what happened the night after the storm passed through our area. The days prior to the storm making landfall here was a scary time. We had heard that it was coming to this direction, and we were prepared for it. But in the back of our minds, we thought and hoped that it would head elsewhere. I mean, after all, this area had not been hit directly by any hurricane or tropical storm since Hurricane Kate in the 1985, considering this is Florida. This had been lucky for the past 23 hurricane seasons, and we had been hoped to stay that away. However, there was something quite unusual about the path of the storm. It seemed to be an deliberate path that had covered the entire state of Florida. That night after the storm was very peculiar and unnerving settling night. After the storm, the sheriff of our county ordered that a mandatory curfew, asking that everyone please ensure that they remain indoors after dark until things were restored back to normal. Because of this, there were no cars on the highway, which made it even more silent. We live very close to a river that runs through this part of the county. Although the river is not close enough to the sea from the houses, and our considerable walk through the woods, the storm had caused it to swell into a raging and violent river that is now literally in the woods of our backyard. Besides the distant sound of raging water and the occasional eerie whisper of the wind blowing through the pines, there was nothing. It felt as if I was the last person on earth, but only little did I know I was not alone. Since the storm had passed, my parents decided to go stay with my elderly grandma, who lived alone and needed someone to be with her until the power was restored and things were back to normal. I was 19 years old, so this was okay with me, although the thought of being alone in the dark seems a bit unnerving. There had been warnings on the radio of looting in the area, so as a precaution we mounted 2 outdoor trail cameras outside. We live in a highly secluded and wooded area, so I hoped that the chance of anyone coming here was low. One of the camera was mounted above the back door and it was motion activated. Therefore, anyone or anything that was coming up to the back door would trigger it to flash and take a picture. The only one was pointed towards the screen door of the front porch. I was sitting in the living room, had a few candles burning in the room, and the living room windows wide open. The storm had left behind a warm and sticky humidity in the air, and since the lack of power meant no air conditioning, the only relief was to have the windows open. I only wanted windows open in the room that I was in currently because the warnings on the radio had me pretty nervous. As I was sitting there trying to read with what little candles provided, I began to hear the faint sound of leaves crackling, as if something was coming. At that moment, it sounded far away, but just close enough for me to hear it. I immediately blew out the candles, as instantly I feared that the looters were warned us about the radio. If that was the case, I did not want them to see me through the windows. I crouched down against the wall, sitting in complete darkness towards the windows, hoping that maybe I could see someone pass by. I sat there, continuing listening to the sound, but it seemed to have stopped for a few minutes. In some attempt to comfort my worried mind, I began to think, perhaps it's wildlife trying to get away from all the swollen river. Just to be safe and certain that it was not a person, I continued sitting there. For a while, all I could hear was the faint sound of river rushing through the trees in the woods behind the houses, and the whispering pine trees swaying in the wind. The only 2 sounds that remain in this world at this dark and scary time. For what felt like an hour, but was really only a matter of minutes, I started to hear the sound again. But this time, it was closer. In addition to this, the sound of crackling leaves was not only closer, but I began hearing the awful sound that sounded almost like a squealing pig or a wild boar. The sound stopped for a moment. I thought perhaps it really is a wild boar, which is not uncommon in this area. I sat there, quite freaked out at this moment, and then I realized I had not locked the back door. I decided to get up and make my way back there to lock the door before whatever it is had a chance to get in. When I walked towards the back, I saw a flash through the window which indicated that something was already at the back door. It was the flash from an outdoor camera mounted above the back door. Frozen in fear, I stood for a moment in dead silence when I heard the sound of heavy boots in the utility room where the back door was. At this moment, I felt sickly and terrified as I knew I was no longer alone, and that someone, somewhere, is in here with me. Was it looters? Was it someone here to cause me harm? All kinds of thoughts were racing to my mind, including where I was going to run to. I could barely make out the sight of a tall figure standing in the doorway. I had a flashlight in my hand. I turned it on and shine it at the back door of the utility room. It was then I saw it. Still today, the most terrifying sight I'd ever seen burned into my mind. There stood a tall figure with the darkest pits in its eyes, a head full of smudging goat-like horns, and hooves at its feet, but yet, when it walked around, it sounded as if a heavy man with boots was walking. Every time I exhaled, it sounding as if it was grunting. It immediately charged at me, making a wheezing, squealing noise. I ran into the guest room, which was right beside me where I was standing. I ran in it, slammed the door shut, popping in against it to hold it closed. I was expecting a struggle, or at least for it to make an attempt to get in. Instead, the slamming of the door, all I heard was silence. Where did it go? Or more seriously, where did it come from? It appeared from the greatest depths of hell. Was this Satan himself? For it felt like an eternity. I sat there quietly against the door, waiting, hoping. It was all gone. I didn't sleep for the remainder of that night. After daylight came, I decided that I at least need to check the house. I slowly opened the door, an inch at a time, and saw nothing there. I took one slow step at a time throughout the house and noticed nothing other than the back door was wide open, swaying in the wind. My thoughts were that nobody would believe this harrowing story, but I knew if I could retrieve the photo from the backdoor camera, then maybe it would show everyone this hideous creature. Several days later, when the power was restored, I connected the camera to my computer to pull up the photos. To my dismay, there was one indeed photo, but when it was displayed, was not what I saw in front of my very eyes. It was shadowed, a blurry orb, like a passing in front of a camera. Still today I wonder, what was it? Where did it come from? And where did it go? I never before saw anything like that, and never has it showed up in its ugly face. However, I am forever haunted by it. I'm still waking up with a lot of warnings at exactly 3:33 a.m. Coincidence? Every time I wake up the sight of 3:33 a.m. on my alarm clock, I have to wonder, is it here? Is it somewhere close by? Watching and waiting. Did this entity come here to send me a message? Or did it send me a warning? Was it related in any way to the storm that seemed deliberately trace its way to me? Perhaps these questions will never be answered. Or perhaps the next time you wake up at 3:33 a.m., it would be somewhere in the room with you, hiding in the darkness around you, watching and waiting to show itself. I worry that that kind of events will come along with the next big storm. But I'll never forget what I saw the night after the tropical storm Faye.